You made an intriguing guess, sir, in one of your books as to why we have underarm hair as a kind of sexual come-on. But what can possibly be the evolutionary advantage to male pattern baldness?
It's to avert jet lag so that you can have sun directly going into the pineal gland through... Isn't it?
If my colleague Desmond Morris were here, he'd come up with half a dozen ingenious ideas. Maybe it's to intimidate rivals. I have absolutely no idea. To the extent that male pattern baldness emerges after reproductive age, then the selection against it is obviously less severe because the genes for it have already got through to the next generation before whatever disadvantages.
Yes. Desmond Morris has a book on the male, which came out just about 2 years ago. He's still living up the road from you, isn't he?
Yes. Yeah.
Forgive me, Richard, I know your field isn't climatology, but I wondered if you might reflect, and you too, Robyn, perhaps, on the recent attacks on climate science and any parallels between the creation, evolution or creation versus science debate, and people's understanding of science and how we communicate science.
Well, I am aware that a new tactic among American creationists, and they're always coming up with new tactics as the previous one gets knocked down, that the latest tactic is indeed to ally themselves with climate change skeptics. And it's easier for them to use that because that doesn't actually have a direct religious connection. And so since they want to make the political point that their campaign against evolution is, for political reasons, it has to be non-religious. Of course, it is religious, but they want it to be represented as non-religious. They use climate change skepticism as another example and ally themselves with climate change skeptics. This is just, I think there's an article in the latest New Scientist about this, so that they can, as it were, ride along on the coattails of climate change skepticism, which is getting increasingly covered.
Yes, there's three articles in the current edition of the Skeptical Inquirer, which is a fabulous magazine published in America, and they make the point that a whole number of people are linked to the anti-smoking, to the smoking lobby, and various other groups which have got training from the PR companies. There's a whole very, very organised gang of people emanating out of the think tanks. And of course the Creation Institute in Seattle is another think tank, because those two people who run that were from a particular part of the Republican Party. Very bright people with Harvard trained and so forth. But there's no question it's a strong political movement, and the characteristic is that they do not budge on what they say. It's always the mantra. You know, there's the Wendy test in this book. Just read those 3 pages about how they completely are unbudgeable when it comes to this stuff. So I think we're on that side now.
Hello. Hello. Just a technical question about evolution. I was wondering if I could pick your brain about recent discoveries in the horizontal transfer of genetic information amongst bacteria and so on, and what implications that might have for conventional evolution.
Yes, this is very interesting. Why is that funny?
You went like that.
Oh, I see.
Are you in the field yourself?
I asked a good question. I'm just very happy that I asked a good
question.
Okay, thank you. Well done.
If you study animals as I do, then you're used to the idea that evolution is a constantly branching process. When a species first diverges into 2 daughter species, that it goes through a period when it's possible for there to be gene exchange, when it's still possible to hybridize. And lions and tigers are kind of just beyond that stage now, and horses and donkeys and so on. They've just reached the stage where they can hybridize, but usually not in a fertile manner. And then when it diverges still further, then they don't even try to hybridize. And then from then on, there is never, ever, ever any more gene exchange. And so that makes the study of evolution rather nice and simple, because it's always diverging. You never get coming together again once this original separation has taken place. But when you get to bacteria, all that's out of the window, and bacteria operate a kind of promiscuous. It's not really sex, because they don't exchange half their genes the way we larger creatures do. But it's a sort of promiscuous, free-for-all cut and paste or copy and paste. It really is like copying a bit of text from one document and pasting it into another document. And there's a profligate copy and paste world in bacteria. They get genetic tricks from each other. Genetic tricks get copied and pasted from one bacterium to another, so much so that you can't really use the normal criterion for defining species in bacteria at all. Bacteria that are very, very different from each other, which would, under no normal circumstances, be called members of the same species, can receive or donate genetic information to each other. And this is one of the ways in which, for example, antibiotic resistance gets passed around. So within the bacteria, which is a very large slice of life, I mean, it's very bacteria are enormously important, horizontal gene transfer becomes important. It becomes ubiquitous. And so it's possible to say from that if you take seriously the fact that bacteria are so numerous, that means that horizontal gene transfer can't be ignored. There are a few cases where horizontal gene transfer has been alleged between larger eukaryotic, things like animals, organisms. I'm not sure how authentic they are.
Just about 4 minutes left. Just a thought that I think it's 4 or 5% of our genetic code is actually to make us, Richard and me, separately. And about 30% is barcodes of bacteria and various other viruses that have come and gone. 30%?
Yes.
Yeah. Please.
Yes.
Hi. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how important you think it is that currently practicing scientists are able to, and perhaps make the effort to explain their science to a wider public, and perhaps given the increasing specialisation of science and the difficulties that presents?
I think it's very important. Thank you for raising it. I think it's extremely important that scientists should attempt to explain what they do, and when they do, they're often very good at it. So scientists shouldn't be diffident about that. It is very important, if only for economic reasons. I mean, the money for most science comes from the taxpayer, and so it's important that people should understand where their money is going, so that they're happy about science being properly funded. But the other thing, of course, it is just fascinating. And so doing the sort of thing that Robyn does is just very, very important for cultural, aesthetic reasons, never mind for useful reasons.
Thank you.
I hope you don't think I'm putting you on the spot, but I have a question about your tactics as a sort of campaigner for reason and science and so on. How do you defend yourself when you're criticized that your sort of tendency to be bombastic and, I'm going to say offensive, strident,
assertive,
when you're accused that is more divisive, when that does more to turn, say, religious people off rather than getting them to your cause?
Well, I don't think I really do sound very bombastic or strident or offensive. I do think that there is something about religion that when religious people hear even quiet, calm, reasoned criticism
in New College, Oxford,
it sounds strident to them. There's a lovely quote from Douglas Adams, which I can't render from memory, but I think it's in The God Delusion, where he makes the point that in any other walk of life you can have an argument. You can argue, as he says, about Macintosh versus Windows and this football team versus that football team, and conservatives versus Labour or Liberal. And you have a respectable argument, and you may get a bit heated about it, but people don't take offence. But if you say something really mild about religion, like, for example, there's a bus campaign going on in America at the moment, which says, the poster on a bus says, "You can be good without God." And that's offensive. You see what I mean? I mean, this is an example of how what actually is mild and sober and just nothing special about it, it sounds offensive because religion has managed to grab for itself this cocoon of immunity to being criticized, such that any criticism, however mild, sounds offensive.
They accused you in the press, I think, of funding training camps like madrasas for atheists. It's completely untrue.
Yes, it is completely untrue.
Following on from Robyn's comments about homosexuality earlier, which were more jestful, but Richard, could you comment about what kind of evolutionary advantage homosexuality could have ever offered, and how, when it's sort of something by definition that almost can't really carry on from generation to generation?
Yes. There are various theories which sort of ingenious. I'm not sure if I agree with them. We're talking about homosexuality. We didn't quite hear the key word. Is that what?
Yes, more or less. What would be John or Joan Roughgarden has written a couple of books on it, and I think there are 450 different species being shown do have some homosexual play. In fact, it's practice, they suggest.
Yes, you could say that's practice. In the case of humans, well, one theory is the worker bee theory that in our primitive ancestors, when dominant males went off, say, hunting, and left the women behind in the village or in the camp, they would have liked to have left them under the protection of males. And what better way to... that's not the worker bee theory. The worker bee theory is that uncles might look after their nephews, and so they get the genes passed on even if they are homosexual.
That doesn't explain Bruno.
Who's he?
He came after
I remember.
Borat.
Yes, I remember. No, but I was going on to the more interesting theory, which is the theory that says that when dominant males went hunting, they left behind the women and children in the charge of males that they could trust not to mate with them, and not to mate with the women. And what better badge of trust could you earn than being ostentatiously gay? If the ostentatiously gay individuals were in fact bisexual, then this would have been an alternative way to reproduce, given that you were not in a position to take over, say, a harem. But if you were trusted by the harem owner to look after the harem when the harem owner went off hunting, then being gay might have been a way to earn that trust. But actually the theory that I favour is something slightly more subtle, which is that when we talk about genetic tendencies to do anything, in this case to be homosexual, the gene for X is only a gene for X under the right environmental conditions. And so the question only arises, of course, if there is genetic variation in sexual orientation, and there does seem to be, twin studies do seem to suggest that there is. But what if in the past the gene for homosexuality was not a gene for homosexuality at all, but a gene for something quite different? Under other environmental conditions, it would have manifested itself in some other way. It could have been, for example, that you need to be bottle-fed in order for this gene to manifest itself as homosexual behaviour. So if a baby is breastfed, then this particular gene manifests itself as something quite other. And if the baby is bottle-fed, then eventually when it grows up, this particular gene predisposes it to be homosexual. So in a world before bottles were invented, the gene would never have had a chance to express itself in the way that it now expresses itself. Now the bottle feeding example is just an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. It very likely wouldn't have been that. But there are all sorts of other possibilities for an environmental switch of the effect that a gene actually has. And so it could be that natural selection favoured the gene under other conditions when it didn't show itself as homosexual behaviour at all. And only now, under our changed civilized conditions, whether it's bottles or whatever it might be, does it show itself in that way?
Last question, please.
Firstly, Richard, I'd like to say your lucid speech is something we should all aspire to. And my question is, what is your goal? And by that I mean, do you seek to cure or wake up people who are spiritually ignorant, I suppose, religious or otherwise, or is it an educational option which you provide?
God forbid that I would ever wish to wipe out anybody. Wiping out ideas by reasoned argument is another matter. But even that sounds a little bit too negative. Even wiping out ideas sounds a little bit too negative. I think I'd rather say that science and the study of reality, the realistic study of reality, is so enthralling that it would be a shame not to, if you have any ability to convey that to other people, it would be a crime not to.
And that sums up the book. It's not a crit of the enemy, it's a relishing fabulous ideas. So would you please thank Richard Dawkins.